Zaun, a city of industry and ambition, where fortunes are built atop the wreckage of the past, and power is claimed by those bold enough to seize it. Here, progress and ruin go hand in hand, fueled by chemtech innovations that sustain as much as they destroy. The air is thick with ambition, an intoxicating haze that drives the desperate and the cunning alike to carve out their place in a world that does not grant second chances. Among the countless figures who have shaped Zaun's chaotic landscape, some names loom larger than others. The Undercity's past is littered with titans of innovation, ruthless crime lords, and visionaries who saw the potential to forge something greater. Yet, true dominion over Zaun has never belonged to any single force. Even the most feared leaders have found their grip slipping, their power challenged by the relentless churn of progress and betrayal. In this city, survival is not just about strength, it is about control. Into this volatile world steps a woman who does not merely seek to survive, but to command. Renata Glasc is no common chem baron, no petty tyrant clinging to influence through brute force alone. She is something else entirely, an orchestrator, a benefactor, a ruler who wields loyalty as both weapon and shield. Her name is spoken with reverence and dread, for those who work under her banner prosper, and those who oppose her find themselves at the mercy of forces they cannot hope to resist. But can Zaun truly belong to one ruler? The city is a living, breathing entity shaped by forces beyond any one individual. To claim dominion over it is to challenge history itself. Is Renata Glasc the first to hold such ambitions? No. Will she be the last? Unlikely. Yet unlike those before her, she does not merely claim power. She reshapes the very nature of what power means. This is the story of Renata Glasc, her rise, her influence, and the question that lingers in the shadows of every chem-laden street. Is she truly Zaun's ruler, or is she merely another player in a city that will never be tamed? Zaun's power struggles are shaped by those who dare to claim influence over its future. Some are deeply entrenched in the city's foundations, while others are emerging forces, each with their own ambitions. The network of control is not dictated by a singular entity, but rather by a series of shifting alliances, hidden agendas, and unspoken rivalries. Understanding the key players is essential to grasping the full scope of Renata Glasc's influence and the forces she must contend with. At the center stands the Chem Barons, a collective of ruthless industrialists, smugglers, and warlords who control vast portions of Zaun's economy. These figures dictate the flow of resources, from black market chemicals to vital technological advancements, ensuring that their grip on the city remains firm. They are not a unified force, but a volatile coalition, each with their own domains and interests. Some see Renata as an ally, others as a rival, and a few view her as a threat that must be dealt with before she upends the existing order. Beyond the Chem Barons lies the Piltover elite, the aristocracy of the city above, whose wealth and influence shape the development of Zaun in ways unseen. Though their presence is rarely felt directly in the streets below, their control over trade, regulations, and enforcement measures places them in a position of quiet authority. Some see Zaun as nothing more than a resource to be exploited, while others understand that maintaining a degree of stability benefits both cities. Their interests may align with Renata's in certain matters, but their reluctance to acknowledge Zaun as an equal ensures that their interactions remain fraught with tension. The Grey Legion, a mercenary force operating in Zaun's shadows, represents another player in this struggle. Comprised of exiled enforcers, deserters, and those seeking refuge from Piltover's laws, they act as enforcers for hire, selling their services to the highest bidder. Some are loyal only to coin, while others have deeper allegiances, offering their skills to those they believe can bring true change. Whether they stand as obstacles or tools in Renata's path depends entirely on where their interests lie at any given moment. Zaun's scientific community also plays a crucial role. Researchers, engineers, and chemtech innovators work on the bleeding edge of progress, creating advancements that can shift the balance of power overnight. Some operate in secret, fearing that their work will be seized and repurposed by those with darker intentions. Others openly align themselves with influential figures, hoping to gain protection and funding in exchange for their breakthroughs. This group includes both independent minds and those who serve under the Chem Barons, each vying to push the limits of what technology can achieve. Beneath the surface, the Silent Veil operates in obscurity. This elusive network of informants and spies deals in information rather than force, trading secrets that can make or break those in power. Their presence is rarely acknowledged, yet their influence can be felt in every significant decision made within the city. Those who fail to recognize their importance often find themselves blindsided by events they never saw coming. Finally, the people of Zaun themselves cannot be overlooked. They are the workers, traders, and survivors who navigate the chaos of daily life, adapting to an environment where change is the only constant. Some embrace the rule of those who offer stability, while others resist any attempt to impose order upon them. Their needs and loyalties shift based on who they believe will provide them with a better future. In the end, no ruler can truly claim Zaun without winning over the very people who give it life. Each of these factions plays a role in shaping the city's future, whether they seek dominance, survival, or something else entirely. Renata Glasc's rise is not one that happens in isolation. Her success or failure is tied to how she navigates the ambitions, rivalries, and shifting allegiances of those who seek control over Zaun's destiny. Zaun's current state did not emerge overnight. The city has always existed in the shadow of Piltover, shaped by decisions made far above its streets. Decades of economic imbalance, unchecked industrial expansion, and power struggles created the conditions that now define its existence. Every shift in authority, every advancement in technology, and every unspoken deal in backrooms contributed to the fragile structure of control that governs it today. What led to this moment was not a single event, but a series of transformations that slowly built toward an inevitable reckoning. The earliest foundations of Zaun's instability were laid with the rise of its industrial sector. While Piltover established itself as a beacon of progress, a city built on order and commerce, Zaun grew in its underbelly, developing along a far different path. Without the same level of oversight or restriction, it became a place where innovation flourished unchecked, but at great cost. The unchecked pursuit of scientific advancement led to breakthroughs in chemtech, a discipline that merged alchemical knowledge with emerging industrial techniques. Though this field promised unprecedented potential, it also introduced instability, as those who mastered it quickly realized its power could be weaponized, exploited, and monopolized. As chemtech became the backbone of Zaun's economy, control over its production determined who held real influence in the city. Industrial leaders who once worked in isolation began to consolidate, forming alliances or eliminating competitors to secure their own future. The era of scattered workshops gave way to the dominance of organized factions, each vying for control over key resources. These shifts led to the emergence of the Chem Barons, a loosely connected network of powerful individuals who dictated the city's economic and political landscape. Their rise was not marked by open conquest, but by a gradual tightening of control over the infrastructure that sustained Zaun. While the Chem Barons established their grip, Piltover's influence further shaped the city's trajectory. Trade agreements ensured that Zaun remained dependent on the upper city's markets, creating a system where wealth flowed upward while risks and burdens remained below. Every advancement in Piltover's technology introduced new challenges for Zaun, as innovations were either withheld from the Undercity or repurposed in ways that reinforced existing inequalities. The divide between the two cities deepened, ensuring that any attempt by Zaun to assert itself as an independent power was met with resistance from those who benefited from its subjugation. At the same time, internal conflicts within Zaun escalated. As chemtech development continued, those with the resources to experiment pushed the boundaries of what was possible, often with little regard for consequences. Entire sectors of the city were reshaped by industrial accidents, unregulated testing, and the unchecked ambition of those seeking an edge over their rivals. The balance of power was constantly shifting, making stability a rare commodity. Some sought to establish order, believing that Zaun could only thrive if it functioned under a unified vision, while others saw control as a limitation to progress. This volatile environment created an opening for those who understood how to manipulate systems rather than simply force their will upon them. It was no longer enough to command through strength alone. True power belonged to those who could dictate the terms by which others operated. The nature of control in Zaun evolved, no longer defined by territorial dominance, but by influence over resources, loyalty, and infrastructure. Those who could provide solutions to the city's problems gained not only wealth, but also unwavering support from those who relied on them. In this landscape, the path toward rule was no longer about eliminating rivals, but about becoming indispensable. The question was not who had the most force at their disposal, but who could shape the future in their image. The old ways of governance, fear, brute strength, and monopolization had proven unreliable in the long run. A new form of authority was emerging, one that relied on economic dependency, ideological alignment, and strategic alliances. The struggle for power in Zaun was no longer just about who controlled the streets, but who controlled the systems that allowed the city to function. This was the foundation upon which the next stage of Zaun's history would be built. The forces that shaped the city were already in motion, but now the question was, who would harness them? The age of warlords and unchecked expansion had given way to an era of calculated dominance, where influence outweighed intimidation. This transformation did not happen overnight, nor did it happen by chance. It was the inevitable result of a city adapting to its own chaos, setting the stage for a new kind of leadership to emerge. Renata Glasc's ascent to power was not an isolated event, but a sequence of calculated moves, each one reinforcing her control over Zaun's economic and political structure. Unlike the chaotic rise of past rulers who relied on brute force, her influence expanded through strategy, patience, and an understanding of how to make others dependent on her success. The transformation of Zaun's power dynamic unfolded in several key stages, each contributing to the larger shift in authority. The initial phase of her rise began with the consolidation of resources. While many chem barons controlled vast territories and their own private industries, Renata focused on securing the most critical aspect of Zaun's infrastructure: supply chains. Chemtech production was only as valuable as the networks that delivered it, and through a series of acquisitions, alliances, and hostile takeovers, she positioned herself as the one who dictated who received what, when, and at what price. By ensuring that the flow of essential chemicals, medical supplies, and energy sources ran through her channels, she gained leverage over both allies and rivals alike. Once the foundations of control were established, the next stage was securing loyalty. Unlike previous figures of power, who relied on mercenaries or brute enforcement, Renata introduced a new model: financial and contractual dependency. Those who aligned with her found their businesses flourishing, their research funded, and their problems conveniently resolved. Those who resisted found themselves gradually isolated, cut off from supply lines, burdened with debts they could not repay, or facing unseen pressures that forced them into compliance. Her influence was not about open domination, but about making herself indispensable. As her reach expanded, tensions with the other chem barons became inevitable. Many saw her growing power as a direct challenge to the balance of Zaun's hierarchy. In response, alliances among rival factions formed, aimed at countering her control. However, rather than engaging in outright conflict, Renata played a different game. She did not seek to dismantle her opposition directly. Instead, she turned them against each other. Through carefully placed incentives, subtle manipulations, and strategic disruptions, her adversaries found themselves embroiled in conflicts that drained their resources and shattered their unity. By the time they realized what had happened, she had already positioned herself as the most stable and reliable force in Zaun. With the Chem Barons divided, the next step was expanding her influence beyond business. Renata understood that true power was not just about controlling supply chains, but about shaping perception. She introduced policies and initiatives that framed her as a benefactor of the people rather than a corporate tyrant. Public medical programs, technological advancements, and promises of stability won her the support of many who had previously been indifferent to Zaun's power struggles. Those who once saw her as just another industrialist began to view her as a necessary force for progress. As her control solidified, outside forces took notice. Piltover, long content with maintaining its indirect control over Zaun through economic pressure and selective enforcement, began to recognize that Renata was no ordinary entrepreneur. Her influence threatened to disrupt the existing balance between the two cities, and some within Piltover's elite saw this as a potential risk. Attempts were made to undermine her. Trade restrictions, sabotage efforts, and diplomatic maneuvers designed to weaken her standing. However, Renata had already anticipated such moves. Rather than confront Piltover directly, she leveraged her growing network to ensure that any action taken against her would have far-reaching consequences. Every restriction imposed was met with an economic shift that forced Piltover's merchants and industrialists to reconsider their positions. The more they attempted to stifle her, the more they realized how deeply their own interests had become entangled with hers. As the final stage of her rise unfolded, Renata no longer needed to fight for control. It was given to her by necessity. Those who once opposed her now found themselves seeking her favor. The old ways of Zaun's governance, rule by scattered warlords, constant infighting, and unsustainable expansion, had proven insufficient. In a city where survival depended on stability, Renata provided exactly that, albeit on her terms. Her rule was not enforced through fear alone, but through an intricate web of reliance, strategy, and calculated generosity. With her dominance established, the question was no longer whether she could take control of Zaun, but whether anyone could possibly take it from her. The defining moment of Renata Glasc's rise was not a dramatic coup or a violent overthrow, but a calculated shift in control that left her opposition with no ground to stand on. The moment she truly cemented herself as the most dominant figure in Zaun came when she forced the Chem Barons into a position where their own survival depended on her. This was not done through open war or direct confrontation, but through a decision that rewrote the fundamental rules of power in the city. The balance of Zaun's underworld had always rested on a fragile system of trade, alliances, and the unspoken understanding that no single entity could ever claim absolute authority. Each faction relied on a network of resources that, while competitive, ensured that no one power could dominate without severe consequences. The Chem Barons had operated under these conditions for years, believing their influence secure as long as they maintained their hold over critical sectors of industry and commerce. Renata, however, understood that true control did not come from territory or raw force alone. It came from dictating the terms of necessity. The turning point came when Renata orchestrated a shift in Zaun's economy that left every major player in a position where their continued success, and in some cases their very survival, hinged on their dependence on her. This was achieved through a series of maneuvers that systematically removed the traditional safety nets that had allowed the Chem Barons to operate independently. Supply chains that had once been diversified were slowly rerouted through her networks. Financial institutions that provided backing for large-scale operations found themselves under her influence. Key industrial sites that once functioned as independent strongholds suddenly found their most critical components sourced exclusively from her companies. The realization of this shift did not come all at once, but rather in a series of escalating crises that exposed just how deeply she had embedded herself into Zaun's infrastructure. What had once been seen as mere competition turned into an inescapable reliance. Factories that had never needed outside assistance suddenly found that essential chemicals were only available through Renata's channels. Mercenary groups that had long operated as neutral enforcers discovered that their funding and supplies had been indirectly funneled through her enterprises. Even medical institutions, long considered separate from the power struggles of the Undercity, were now forced to negotiate with her for access to life-saving treatments that only she could provide. This transition culminated in a single event that forced every remaining rival to acknowledge the reality of the new order. A supply crisis, carefully engineered over months, left several major operations on the verge of collapse. With no external sources available to bail them out, the Chem Barons faced a choice: either submit to Renata's terms or risk complete ruin. Some attempted to resist, scrambling to find alternative routes, but every option had been anticipated and systematically dismantled. The few who outright refused to comply found their territories destabilized, their operations gutted not by direct attack, but by economic suffocation. The message was clear. Resistance was not just futile, but self-destructive. When the moment of reckoning arrived, it was not marked by grand declarations or public displays of dominance. Instead, it was a series of quiet meetings, contracts signed under pressure, and agreements made out of sheer necessity. Those who had once ruled through brute force and intimidation now found themselves as participants in a system where they were no longer at the top. Renata did not demand fealty. She simply made it so that aligning with her was the only logical path forward. From that moment, the nature of power in Zaun was no longer dictated by the old ways. The Chem Barons, once seen as untouchable, had been restructured under a new order, one where control was exercised not through fear alone, but through absolute economic and logistical supremacy. Those who had thrived in chaos now operated under her design, willingly or otherwise. It was in that moment that Zaun's true ruler was no longer in question. The consolidation of Renata Glasc's power reshaped the very fabric of Zaun, altering its trajectory in ways that extended far beyond the borders of the Undercity. The once unpredictable and fractured landscape of industrial dominance gave way to a structured system where control was no longer dictated by raw force, but by economic and strategic influence. This transformation did not simply change the way Zaun operated internally. It had far-reaching consequences that rippled outward, affecting everything from its relationship with Piltover to the lives of its citizens. The most immediate impact was a dramatic shift in how power functioned within Zaun itself. With the Chem Barons now operating under her influence, the constant territorial disputes and violent skirmishes that once characterized Zaun's streets became significantly less frequent. Conflict had not been eliminated, but it had been restructured. Instead of outright battles, disputes were now settled through negotiations orchestrated on Renata's terms, reinforcing her role as the ultimate arbitrator of Zaun's affairs. Those who had previously thrived in anarchy were forced to adapt or fade into irrelevance. The very nature of authority in Zaun had been rewritten, making brute force an outdated method of rule. At the same time, the economic landscape of Zaun experienced a profound transformation. Industries that had once been dictated by independent factions now operated under a coordinated framework that allowed for unprecedented growth and stability. Chemtech advancements accelerated as researchers who had previously been limited by fragmented funding and internal conflicts now worked under centralized sponsorship. Medical technology, in particular, saw rapid development, as Renata's investments ensured that life-saving treatments and enhancements became more accessible, but always at a cost. Dependency on her resources meant that even the most rebellious elements of Zaun had no choice but to engage with the new system she had established. The growing stability of Zaun also had consequences for its relationship with Piltover. The upper city had long relied on Zaun's internal divisions to maintain its own dominance, leveraging the constant infighting below to ensure that no single entity could ever challenge its authority. Now, for the first time, Piltover faced an undercity that was not only united under a singular force, but also economically powerful enough to negotiate on equal footing. Trade agreements that had once been dictated entirely by Piltover's interests were now subject to renegotiation, as Renata's control over vital resources forced even the most resistant Piltovans to acknowledge Zaun as a legitimate player in the global market. This shift in power did not go unnoticed by Piltover's ruling elite. Some viewed the newfound order in Zaun as an opportunity, believing that working with Renata would allow for a more profitable and structured relationship between the two cities. Others, however, saw her growing influence as a direct threat to Piltover's control. Attempts were made to undermine her authority through trade restrictions, covert sabotage, and political maneuvering, but none proved effective in reversing the course of her rise. Every challenge only reinforced the reality that Zaun was no longer an undercity defined by instability, but a city-state in its own right, led by a force too entrenched to be easily dismantled. The changes were not limited to economics and politics. The social fabric of Zaun itself began to evolve. The lower-class citizens, who had long lived at the mercy of unchecked industrial expansion and the whims of the chem barons, found themselves in a new dynamic. Renata's rule did not promise equality or fairness, but it did offer structure. Opportunities for advancement, once dictated solely by strength or criminal affiliations, now became tied to one's ability to navigate the system she had created. Those who aligned themselves with her found paths to prosperity, while those who resisted found it increasingly difficult to operate outside her influence. For many, this new reality was preferable to the chaotic and brutal past. Zaun's history had been one of constant struggle, with no guarantee of security or stability. Now, for the first time, there was a sense of direction, an understanding that power in Zaun was no longer a shifting battlefield, but a carefully maintained system of dependencies. Some saw this as an improvement, while others viewed it as an illusion of choice, replacing one form of control with another. Regardless of perspective, the fact remained that Zaun had changed in a way that could not be undone. As Renata's influence spread, her reach extended beyond Zaun and Piltover. Other industrial centers, once dismissive of Zaun's potential, began to take notice of its rapid ascension. Chemtech innovations pioneered under her guidance found their way into global markets, altering the balance of technological advancement across multiple regions. Cities that had once ignored Zaun now sought to engage with it, recognizing that its resources and developments had become too valuable to overlook. This new status came with its own set of challenges. With greater recognition came greater scrutiny, as factions from beyond Zaun's borders sought to understand and, if possible, counterbalance Renata's growing influence. Some viewed her as a necessary force of progress, while others saw her as a dangerous destabilizer. Whether regarded as a visionary leader or a ruthless manipulator, one truth remained undeniable. Zaun was no longer a city controlled by competing warlords and reckless ambition. It was now an empire of influence, and Renata Glasc was the one holding the strings. One of the most discussed and debated aspects of Renata Glasc's rise is the methodology behind her influence and the unique mechanics that set her apart from other figures of power in Zaun. Unlike past rulers who relied on brute force, territorial dominance, or political alliances, Renata's control is built on something far more insidious: dependency. Her approach to power is fundamentally different because it is rooted in economic and psychological control rather than traditional forms of leadership. A major point of discussion among those who analyze her rule is the idea that her true power is not in her wealth or her industry, but in the way she conditions people to rely on her. This extends beyond simple financial influence. It reaches into the very nature of choice itself. Renata does not force obedience. She makes it the most logical, beneficial, and ultimately unavoidable option. By structuring her control in a way that rewards compliance with prosperity and punishes defiance with hardship, she creates a system where opposition becomes self-destructive. This concept is particularly fascinating because it mirrors real-world power structures, where those in control do not always rule through direct oppression, but through the careful engineering of reliance. Another point of interest is her use of technology, particularly the chemtech advancements that have played a role in shaping her influence. Chemtech in Zaun has always been a powerful tool, but under Renata's guidance, it has become something far more refined and purposeful. The most notable example is her signature method of control, chemical influence that alters perception and behavior. This goes beyond traditional mind control or brute force coercion. It operates on a level where individuals willingly align with her because they believe it benefits them, even when it might not. This has led to extensive discussions within the fan community about the extent of her control. Are those who follow her truly making their own decisions, or have they been subtly conditioned to see her as their best option? This idea is further reinforced by the way she interacts with those in power. Unlike traditional rulers, Renata does not seek to replace or overthrow her opposition outright. She assimilates them. Many figures who once stood against her now work under her banner, not because they were defeated, but because they found themselves in a situation where joining her was the most beneficial course of action. Some argue that this is a form of psychological warfare, where she does not need to destroy her enemies when she can simply make them see her as a necessary part of their survival. One of the most intriguing discussions surrounding her influence is the ethical question of whether she is truly a villain or simply a more advanced form of leader. Unlike the traditional figures of power in Zaun who thrive on chaos, Renata offers stability. Her methods may be ruthless, but they bring order to a city that has historically been defined by its unpredictability. This creates a moral paradox. Should she be seen as a tyrant, or as the only one capable of turning Zaun into something greater than it has ever been? Many argue that her rule is no worse than the anarchic systems that preceded her, and in some ways it may even be preferable. Others believe that the illusion of choice she creates is more dangerous than outright oppression, as it gives the appearance of freedom while ensuring that true independence is impossible. Her relationship with Piltover also adds another layer to this discussion. Unlike past Zaunite leaders who have either resisted Piltover's influence or sought to overthrow it, Renata operates in a way that forces Piltover to recognize her as an equal. This is significant because it changes the nature of Zaun's position in the world. Rather than being seen as a lawless undercity, Zaun under Renata's influence has the potential to be viewed as a legitimate economic power. Some fans speculate that this could eventually lead to a redefinition of Zaun's status, where it is no longer treated as a secondary entity, but as a force capable of negotiating on its own terms. Perhaps the most controversial aspect of her rule is the question of how far she is willing to go to maintain control. Many theorize that her ultimate goal is not just to rule Zaun, but to fundamentally reshape it into a city that operates entirely under her design. If true, this would mean that everything she has done up to this point is merely the foundation for something far greater. Some argue that she is not just consolidating power, but preparing for a long-term transformation that will make her influence permanent. If this is the case, then Zaun is not simply changing. It is being rewritten according to her vision, and those within it may not even realize the full extent of what is happening until it is too late. These discussions continue to fuel debates about her character, her methods, and what her rise means for the future of Zaun. Whether she is seen as a savior, a manipulator, or something in between, there is no denying that she represents a shift in how power functions in the city. Unlike those before her, she does not demand loyalty. She makes it inevitable. Renata Glasc's ascent to power did not occur in isolation. The forces that shaped her rise and the challenges she faced were defined by individuals who either stood in her way, supported her ambitions, or sought to undermine her influence. Each of these figures played a role in shaping Zaun's new order, whether as obstacles to be overcome or as pieces strategically placed within her growing empire. Among the most significant figures was one of Zaun's oldest and most respected industrialists, a man who once believed that progress should be driven by open competition rather than consolidation. He had built his reputation on innovation, guiding chemtech advancements in ways that benefited the Undercity's economy without outright control. His belief in decentralized power made him a natural opponent to Renata's growing monopoly. Unlike many who opposed her, he was not driven by greed or personal gain, but by the conviction that no single entity should dictate Zaun's future. However, his principles proved to be his greatest weakness. While he fought to maintain independence, Renata simply outmaneuvered him. His factories remained untouched, his research continued, but his ability to operate outside her system slowly eroded. Eventually, he found himself in a position where working with her was no longer a choice but a necessity. His fall was not marked by violence, but by the quiet realization that he had lost the ability to shape Zaun's future on his own terms. In contrast, there was an enforcer who thrived in the old world of Zaun, an individual who had spent years maintaining control through force, intimidation, and strategic alliances with the Chem Barons. He believed that power should be taken, not negotiated, and viewed Renata's methods as weak and indirect. His strength lay in his ability to command fear, and for a time, it seemed as though he could rally enough support to challenge her growing influence. However, his reliance on outdated tactics proved to be his downfall. Renata did not confront him head-on. Instead, she systematically dismantled the network of alliances that kept him in power, cutting off his resources and undermining his credibility. His empire crumbled not because of an open assault, but because he no longer had the infrastructure to sustain his position. When the time came for a final confrontation, it was not a battle. He was simply left with no allies, no funding, and no means to resist. He disappeared from Zaun's power structure, his name fading into obscurity as a relic of an era that no longer existed. There was also a scientist whose work had the potential to disrupt the careful balance of control Renata had established. Unlike many of Zaun's researchers who sought funding and protection under the Chem Barons, this individual operated outside the established power structures. His experiments in chemtech enhancements pushed the boundaries of human capability, creating technologies that could rival even the most advanced developments in Piltover. He did not seek wealth or influence, only the freedom to continue his research without interference. Renata recognized both his brilliance and the danger he posed. If left unchecked, his innovations could lead to unpredictable shifts in power, potentially arming those who opposed her with the tools to challenge her authority. She approached him not as a threat, but as an opportunity. He was given funding, resources, and a place within her organization, not as a prisoner, but as a partner. However, whether this partnership was truly voluntary remains a subject of speculation. Some believe he accepted her offer willingly, seeing it as the only way to continue his work without obstruction. Others argue that he had no real choice, that Renata had orchestrated events so that joining her was the only viable path. Another key figure was a former ally who had once been one of Renata's most trusted associates. She had played a critical role in helping establish the networks of influence that allowed Renata to rise to power, believing in the vision of a more structured and controlled Zaun. However, as Renata's methods became more aggressive, she began to question whether the cost of stability was too high. What started as a quiet disagreement eventually grew into a deep ideological divide. She saw herself as someone who had helped build a better future for Zaun, only to realize that the system they had created had become something she could no longer support. She attempted to break away, hoping to form a resistance that could counterbalance Renata's growing influence. However, Renata was always several steps ahead. Before any movement could gain traction, every possible avenue of support had been cut off. Isolated and outmaneuvered, she vanished from the public eye, her fate unknown. Some believe she escaped, waiting for the right moment to challenge Renata's rule. Others suspect that she was dealt with in a way that ensured no trace of her opposition remained. Finally, there was an individual from Piltover who played a crucial role in the ongoing struggle between the two cities. A high-ranking member of one of Piltover's most influential families, he had long viewed Zaun as a necessary but inferior counterpart to Piltover's prosperity. His dealings with Zaun's leaders had always been transactional, ensuring that Piltover remained in control while allowing just enough flexibility to maintain stability. When Renata began consolidating power, he was among the first to recognize the implications. Unlike others in Piltover's elite who dismissed Zaun as perpetually chaotic, he understood that Renata's rise represented something unprecedented, a shift that could alter the balance between the two cities permanently. He attempted to counteract her influence through economic restrictions, political maneuvering, and covert operations aimed at destabilizing her rule. However, every effort he made was met with an equal and opposite response. Where he sought to restrict trade, Renata found new markets. Where he attempted to spread dissent, she exposed his methods and used them to strengthen her own position. His influence remained strong in Piltover, but within Zaun, his power was rendered meaningless. He was left with a bitter realization. The Undercity was no longer under Piltover's control, and there was nothing he could do to change that. Each of these figures represented a different facet of Zaun's transformation. Some were absorbed into the new order, while others faded into obscurity or became casualties of a system they failed to navigate. Their strengths, weaknesses, and ambitions all played a role in the events that led to Renata's rise. Whether they saw her as a savior, a tyrant, or an inevitability, none could deny the fact that she had redefined what it meant to hold power in Zaun. Despite Renata Glasc's undeniable influence over Zaun, many questions remain about the true extent of her power, her ultimate goals, and the long-term consequences of her rule. Her calculated rise has left many theorizing about what her endgame might be, and whether there are deeper forces at play behind her growing empire. These uncertainties fuel ongoing debates among those who study her methods, her influence, and the implications of her presence in Zaun. One of the most frequently discussed theories revolves around the true source of her control. While it is widely understood that she has consolidated power through economic and psychological influence, some believe that there is more at work behind the scenes. The question arises: how much of her authority is built on genuine loyalty, and how much is the result of more subtle, less understood mechanisms? Her advancements in chemtech have allowed her to reshape the way people think and behave, leading some to speculate that her control extends beyond simple business dependencies. Is her influence purely financial and structural, or has she found a way to manipulate decision-making on a deeper level? Some theorists argue that her ability to make people willingly align with her is not just a matter of economic leverage, but could involve unseen chemical or neurological conditioning. If true, this would mean that Zaun's people are not just choosing to follow her. They may not even realize that their choices have been subtly altered. Another point of speculation is whether Renata's control over Zaun is truly absolute. While she has undoubtedly established a new order, history has shown that no ruler remains unchallenged forever. The Chem Barons who once dominated Zaun's power structure did not disappear. They were integrated or neutralized, but many still operate within her system. The question remains: are they truly loyal, or are they merely biding their time, waiting for an opportunity to reassert themselves? Some believe that the moment Renata shows even a hint of weakness, old rivalries will resurface, and the illusion of stability she has created will begin to fracture. Others argue that she has designed her rule to be self-sustaining, ensuring that any attempt to overthrow her would be counterproductive for those involved. There is also the matter of Piltover's response. While Renata has managed to position herself as an equal force rather than a subordinate one, many doubt that Piltover's elite will allow Zaun to operate independently without consequence. Some speculate that Piltover has already begun working in the shadows to undermine her, using tactics far more sophisticated than the direct economic restrictions and political pressure that have failed in the past. If Renata's power is built on stability, then Piltover's best strategy may be to introduce carefully engineered instability, subtle enough that it cannot be traced back to them, but effective enough to shake the foundations of her empire. If this is the case, then Zaun's current peace may be nothing more than a temporary illusion, one that will eventually be shattered when the right opportunity presents itself. One of the most concerning unknowns is whether Renata herself truly believes in the system she has created. Many assume that her ambition is purely about control, but some speculate that she has an end goal far beyond what is currently visible. Is her rule simply a means to an end, or does she have a larger vision that has yet to be revealed? If she is merely securing her own dominance, then her rule will continue as long as she remains the most powerful force in Zaun. However, if she is working towards something greater, then what happens when that goal is achieved? Some believe that she does not intend to remain in Zaun forever, that she sees it as only the first step in a much larger plan. Whether this involves expanding her influence into Piltover, reshaping the balance of power on a global scale, or something even more ambitious remains unclear. There are also lingering questions about those who have disappeared under her rule. While many of her rivals have been publicly defeated or absorbed into her structure, others have simply vanished, their fates unknown. Some argue that they were eliminated quietly, removed before they could become true threats. Others believe that at least some of them still operate in the shadows, working toward a future where they can reclaim what was taken from them. If this is true, then Renata may not be as secure as she appears. There may be forces moving against her that she has yet to fully neutralize. Finally, there is the question of Zaun itself. While many see her leadership as the best chance the city has had for stability, others argue that true change can never come from a single ruler, no matter how effective. Has Zaun truly become stronger under her rule, or has it simply traded one form of dependence for another? Some believe that as long as Zaun remains under any singular authority, it will never achieve true autonomy. If that belief gains traction, it could lead to a movement that challenges her rule not through force, but through a shift in ideology, one that rejects all forms of centralized control, including hers. These unresolved questions ensure that Renata's story is far from over. Whether she is seen as the inevitable ruler of Zaun, or as a temporary force in a constantly changing city, the uncertainties surrounding her rule leave room for speculation about what the future may hold. The only certainty is that as long as she remains in power, the debate over the true nature of her influence will continue. The long-term impact of Renata Glasc's rule extends far beyond Zaun's current state. Her approach to power has already reshaped the city's political and economic landscape, but the full consequences of her influence will only become apparent as time progresses. Whether her control leads to a lasting transformation or an eventual downfall depends on factors that are still in motion. The balance between stability and oppression, progress and dependency, will determine whether Zaun thrives under her leadership or falls into a different kind of turmoil. One of the most significant changes is the shift in how Zaun is perceived, both internally and externally. For much of its history, the city was defined by its chaos, seen as a dangerous and unpredictable undercity that existed only to serve Piltover's interests. Under Renata's rule, Zaun has become more structured, its industries more coordinated, and its political influence more pronounced. This shift alters its position in the global hierarchy. What was once viewed as an uncontrollable, divided region is now a unified economic force. The longer this structure remains in place, the harder it will be to revert to the old ways. If Renata's influence persists, Zaun may no longer be seen as a city beneath Piltover, but as an independent entity capable of shaping its own destiny. This transformation, however, comes with risks. While stability has brought economic growth and technological advancement, it has also created an unprecedented level of dependency. The industries and infrastructure that sustain Zaun now operate within a framework designed by Renata, making it nearly impossible for the city to function without her oversight. This raises concerns about what will happen if she is ever removed from power. Will Zaun collapse under the weight of its own reliance on her system, or will new leaders emerge to maintain what she has built? If her control is too absolute, then her downfall, whether through external intervention, internal betrayal, or even natural succession could lead to catastrophic instability. A city that has learned to operate under a singular authority may struggle to adapt to a sudden power vacuum. The implications of her rule extend beyond Zaun, affecting its relationship with Piltover and the broader world. As Zaun gains strength, Piltover's dominance comes into question. For generations, Piltover has dictated the terms of its interactions with Zaun, controlling trade, enforcing regulations, and ensuring that the Undercity remain dependent on its economy. Renata's rise disrupts this balance. If Zaun continues to develop under her leadership, Piltover will be forced to acknowledge it as an equal rather than a subordinate. This could lead to a more cooperative relationship between the two cities, but it could just as easily result in deeper conflict. Piltover's elites may see Zaun's growing autonomy as a threat, prompting them to take more aggressive measures to weaken Renata's grip before it solidifies beyond their control. The potential for external intervention is another factor to consider. Zaun's transformation is not occurring in isolation. Other regions will take notice of its newfound stability and influence. Some may see opportunities for collaboration, investing in Zaun's industries and benefiting from its technological advancements. Others may view it as a rising power that must be contained before it disrupts the global order. If Renata's influence continues to expand, Zaun could find itself facing pressures from outside forces that seek to either exploit or dismantle its progress. Whether through economic warfare, political maneuvering, or direct confrontation, the rest of the world will not ignore Zaun's evolution indefinitely. Internally, the question remains whether Renata's leadership is truly sustainable in the long run. While her rule has brought order, it has also created resentment among those who prefer the old ways. The suppression of rival factions, the consolidation of power, and the restructuring of Zaun's economy have left many feeling disenfranchised. As long as Renata remains strong, open rebellion is unlikely. But if cracks begin to form in her control, those who were forced into compliance may seize the opportunity to reclaim their influence. Whether through an organized resistance or a slow erosion of her authority, internal opposition could become a significant challenge if left unchecked. There is also the matter of Zaun's technological future. Under Renata's guidance, Chemtech has reached new heights, but its potential is far from fully realized. If she remains in power, Zaun could become the leading force in technological innovation, surpassing even Piltover in certain areas. However, this advancement comes with ethical concerns. Chemtech has always been a double-edged sword, capable of both incredible progress and devastating destruction. If used responsibly, it could revolutionize medicine, energy, and industry. If weaponized, it could turn Zaun into an uncontrollable force that others may feel compelled to stop before it reaches a point of no return. Ultimately, Renata's rule is a turning point in Zaun's history. Whether it leads to a new era of prosperity or a collapse into deeper conflict depends on how the city and its people adapt to the system she has created. If she succeeds in making her control permanent, Zaun could rise as a dominant force in the world. If her rule proves unsustainable, it may only be a matter of time before Zaun is thrown into another cycle of power struggles. Either way, the city will never be the same again.